Hurricane Ian ready to slam into Florida. Many people bracing for that impact. Our friends over there are wondering where their president is. President Biden has refused to call Ron DeSantis. Very interesting because he's called a lot of other people, other governors, when they have been facing tumultuous times. But why not there in Florida? Now, I'm not from Florida, obviously. I'm on the other side of the country. But what we're seeing from the national services looks pretty incredible. Here, this is the summation from the Central Pacific Hurricane Center. Hurricane Ian is looking like this. This is the sort of expected force winds that would be at tropical speeds. And if you're in this purple zone here, you're going to be getting hit. It says, about 90% to 100% plus with tropical force storm winds when the hurricane makes landfall. And there was some interesting clips here when I was poking around on this site. Here was the flash flooding potential, right? It's basically most of the entire state is going to be facing moderate flooding, high at least 70% chance of flooding all the way through Tampa Bay and through Orlando as Hurricane Ian just sort of goes across the entire peninsula. I mean, it's incredible. So some really, shocking numbers you can see here. Rainfall in the amount of inches from the Tampa Bay to the Orlando area is looking like 20 inches, right? In that 15 to 20 inches plus maybe. Talking about 2 feet of rain, right? 2 feet of rain smashing into the East Coast over there for that one Florida man. Potential flooding zones, we covered that one. We've got the arrival times taking place from Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And so big shout outs to all of our friends over there in Florida. And I wanted to just give some locals love to our friends in Florida. 3 girlies, shout out to the youngest girlie, posted this over there. Says, hey, I wanted to post this over there. Current briefing as of 9/27. All Florida members, let us know if we can love you up a little bit. If you're there in Florida, head on over to locals. And of course, say where you're at. And let us send our prayers and our thoughts your way, because apparently it's not going to be a good couple of days. But the White House, that is usually sort of in charge of responding to major domestic catastrophes, is under criticism for not calling Governor Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, who's responsible for managing the crisis. And we can see that Karine Jean Pierre was asked about this at the White House. Karine comes out and the media wants to know, what are you doing about this? There's a lot of people down there who are going to be hit hard by this hurricane. The federal government's supposed to solve all our problems everywhere for everybody all the time. Are you communicating with Ron DeSantis? Have you called him and asked him, what do you need? Because you are, the president. Here's what Karine said.
The FEMA administrator and I just came out of the Oval Office, where the president also held separate calls with Mayor Jane Castor of Tampa, Mayor Ken Welch of St. Petersburg, and Mayor Frank Hibbard of Clearwater. They discussed planning and preparation for Hurricane Ian. The administrator is going to give a little bit more of our conversation in just a moment. The president underscored his commitment to the people of Florida and made clear that impacted communities will have the full support of the federal government to augment state and local emergency response efforts, and emphasized the importance of encouraging families to heed evacuation orders. There will be a full readout of the calls later today in just a moment, but again, the administrator will actually share a little bit of that readout.
Okay, so no phone calls going over to Ron DeSantis. Now, she listed 3 mayors, and you think, okay, well, mayors are great, local towns and stuff, but, they will probably are calling the governor to say, hey, governor, we need some help. We're mayors in this city. And then the governor sort of calls the president. It's one of these things that kind of has been in existence for quite some time. This member of the media asks Karine Jean Pierre about this, saying, President Biden has called a bunch of other people, other governors before. Other presidents have called other governors before. It's kind of a thing that happens. It's just historical precedent. Why is that not happening here?
In the past, President Biden, has made calls to governors in situations of natural disasters, Kay Ivey in Alabama, or Asa Hutchinson in Arkansas, or the governor in Texas. Is there any, can you articulate, I guess, how those determinations are made and why it hasn't been made in this case to have the president call the governor?
Why just not call?
Yeah, the president is very focused on making sure that the federal family has the right resources available to support this. That is why I contacted the governor right away, and we have a team of my senior leadership that are embedded with the governor to make sure that we're supporting that. Our focus today is making sure that we have the right measures in place to support the life-saving activities that need to happen. Any conversations afterwards will need to be, we need to see what the damages are.
It's because we know that Joe Biden thinks that Ron DeSantis is probably a MAGA insurrectionist, which is why he is not going to be called. In other parts of the world, in other parts of the White House, Puerto Rico could use some diesel fuel. They are sitting there. They just got ravaged by a hurricane tropical storm, and they have no power on the entire island. And it's been like that for quite some time. Puerto Rican governors are calling on the United States to send some fuel over to the island so that they can turn their electricity back on. Here's the article from CBS, which is one of the worst websites I've ever used. Good gosh. Can you get rid of all of this crap? Holy moly. What a garbage website. I'll never use this one again. All right, but they said here, more than a week after Hurricane Fiona struck Puerto Rico, knocking out water and power lines, hundreds of thousands of the island's residents and businesses continued to experience blackouts on Monday. A ship is carrying 300,000 barrels of oil, much needed diesel fuel, scheduled to arrive at the hard-hit region on Sunday night, but so far has been unable to dock because of restrictions established by a shipping law dating back 100 years. Story was first reported by Las Noticias. The Jones Act requires merchandise traveling between U.S. ports that were primarily built and owned to go through certain regulations, tariff and taxes imposed, and other things. The vessel is currently stalled off the coast of Puerto Rico. It's called the G.H. Parks, sailing under the flag of Marshall Islands, the U.S. Coast Guard said. It departed from Texas en route to another city, and because the ship is sailing under a foreign flag, it must request a Jones Act waiver. Puerto Rican Ports Director has confirmed the ship is carrying 300,000 barrels of diesel, and that a request was pending late on Sunday. And so we have this very dire situation where there's tons of people on the island. There is no electricity at all. And you have this boat that is just floating around at sea with 300,000 of diesel fuel just sitting there. But because it has the wrong flag on it, it cannot be docked at port in Puerto Rico to provide 300,000 gallons of diesel. So why not? Is it just as simple as authorizing a waiver? Even the Democrats are calling on the Biden administration to wake up and do something. Here is this House representative gentleman on with MSNBC explaining what a catastrophe this is. And all they need is just a waiver from the Biden. Somebody wake him up.
There's a ship that's prepared to deliver diesel to Puerto Rico in its moment of greatest need, but the ship is prohibited by the Jones Act from delivering the diesel because it has a foreign flag rather than an American flag. And so a number of colleagues and I have called upon President Biden and Secretary Mayorkas to grant an emergency waiver to Puerto Rico with respect to the Jones Act. We're not calling for the repeal of the Jones Act. We're calling for an emergency waiver in the midst of a major disaster that has ravaged the island.
So just waive it.
What are the steps that need to be taken so that this emergency waiver can, in effect, be granted, and then this ship able to bring that diesel in? I mean, it's kind of important here.
Yeah, it's just floating out there in the sea.
Look, in the short term, we are convinced that the president has the authority to grant a waiver on an emergency basis, but the longer term solution lies in rebuilding the grid. The federal government has to leverage every tool at its disposal to expedite the rebuilding of the grid, which I consider the most dire infrastructure need in the United States. It's a matter of life and death.
Tens of thousands of people on the island without any electricity This representative says all they need to do is just issue that waiver, the ship can dock and get things going. For some reason, the incompetent Biden administration can't figure it out. Here is the FEMA administrator who is asked about this, saying, hey, there's people who are dying over there. There are people in hospitals who are wasting away. Can you just let the ship dock, for crying out loud? Here's what she said.
Has the administration, or will the administration, waive the Jones Act that would allow for a diesel-carrying ship to dock there in Puerto Rico to help provide necessary provisions of diesel oil to those there?
Yeah, we are committed to doing everything that we can within our legal authority to support the people of Puerto Rico. And we know that the Jones Act waiver is one of those things. We have a legal obligation to ensure that each waiver request meets the legal requirements of Congress. And so any final determination on that will be made by the Secretary of Homeland Security.
Well, they care about Congress now. They ask Congress to do certain things before they just start taking action. But they didn't ask Congress for student loans, for example. They didn't ask Congress to make changes to CDC regulations that prohibit people from exercising property rights. They didn't ask Congress for all sorts of things. But now they have to really slow things down. And we got to wait. Hold on a minute now. We don't want to let a ship dock somewhere and violate some law somewhere in the United States. This is the total failure of government action. Could you imagine being on that island and some idiot bureaucrat in Washington is sitting around saying, hold on a minute, let me look up the law. Meanwhile, there's a ship out there, 300,000 gallons of diesel. There's people dying all across the island and they're just floating around out here. This federal emergency management person is out there. Well, we've got to follow the law out there, because they can't figure it out. But when it's election season and they want to just grant people checks of $10,000 to waive their student loans, they just put it out in an executive order. They don't care. They don't do anything.
Given the pressure we've heard from the Puerto Ricans and the governor in that territory right now, what time frame should they anticipate that decision should be made, given the urgent need for that oil?
I know that they are actively working on that approval process or that consideration right now, and so I don't have a time frame for you right now.
No time frame for you. Can you compare and contrast this with Donald Trump? Honestly, it would be obvious. Okay. Donald Trump would say, just dock it. Just dock it right now. Just tell them the president said to dock it, and they would dock it. That would be the end of it. Right. And then everybody else would figure it out after the fact. And, you'd have a bunch of people in the left screaming about, oh, Trump's a lawbreaker and all this crap. These people will they will dump over the rules every single time if they can help it. So it begs the question, why here? Why are they letting these poor people in Puerto Rico suffer? So that they are in compliance with the law for a lawless administration? Something rotten and evil about these people. I'm not sure what it is. But anyways, and they care about, anyways, the whole point is rotten people in charge. Nothing is getting done because our government is mostly filled with incompetent failure bureaucrats who have evaporated America's ability for state capacity. Totally embarrassing. We'll continue to follow, though, and thanks for joining us as we do.